Question number 10, Dr. David Clark.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development and asks, is he still committed to the government's goal of lifting exports from 30% to 40% of GDP by 2025?
The Honourable Todd McLeay.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, and if the House would bear with me, it's quite a detailed answer, which I think is important. On behalf of the Minister of Economic Development, the Government is committed to lifting the performance of the export sector. The target of lifting the ratio of real exports to real GDP from 30 to 40% by 2025 was set in 2012, when the GDP figures were based on the 1996 year. In December 2014, Statistics New Zealand made an unusually large number of historical revisions to some of our national accounts data, and as a result of adopting new international standards and updating the base year for GDP calculations. This meant a significant revision of the New Zealand ratio of real exports to GDP and a reduction to the order of 3 to 4% each and every year since 1998, affecting all the years Labor was in office, as well as the current national government.
Order. The answer now is quite long enough. The answer is long enough. Order. Point of order. Dr. David Clark.
Point of order, sir. It was a question on notice and asked a very simple question. Is he committed to the government's goal? The answer, I think he was about to give.
Order. Member will resume his seat. I'm comfortable that that question's been addressed. Does the member have a supplementary?
Certainly.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
Will he rule out lowering the target?
Honourable Todd McLeay.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, we are therefore currently evaluating whether to make a technical adjustment to the target to reflect the revised Statistics New Zealand change in historical series. Any change would be no more than the level of the adjustment to the actual figures by Statistics New Zealand.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
He's not prepared to rule it out. Can the Minister confirm that an export growth rate of between 5.5% and 7.5% is now required to meet the government's goal of exports reaching 40% of GDP by 2025, more than twice the rate of growth expected in the wider economy?
Speaker. Honourable Todd McLeay.
On behalf of the Minister, given the answer to the primary question, the member would need to go and check those figures. However, what I would say, Mr. Speaker, is that since 2008 we have seen strong growth. New Zealand's goods exports have increased by 21%, 14% for goods and services, and are now valued at more than $51 billion. When services like tourism, film production, which wouldn't be possible if the members opposite had been in government.
Order. I can't see that we're getting anywhere near close to answering the question. I'm going to invite Dr. Clark to ask that question again.
Can the Minister confirm that an export growth rate of between 5.5% and 7.5% is now required to meet the government's goal of exports reaching 40% of GDP by 2025, more than twice the rate of growth expected in the wider economy?
Speaker.
Honourable Todd McLeay.
Mr. Speaker, no. Based upon the primary answer to the primary question, those statistics or figures would need to be checked. But what I can confirm, however, is that New Zealand's exports stand at $68 billion today, a significant growth since 2008 when we came to government.
Order. We're not getting any further. I'll allow them. Order. Would the member like to continue with supplementary? And he now has an extra supplementary.
Thank you, sir. Why is shifting the official measure of the government's export failure from value to volume in New Zealand's long-term interest?
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Todd McLeay.
Mr. Speaker, the Business Growth Agenda Export Markets work stream has always referred to the ratio of real exports to real GDP. The Minister, on his behalf, is currently evaluating whether to make a technical adjustment to the target to reflect the revised Statistics New Zealand figures, as the original target was set based on the previously high series. Any change would be no more than the level of adjustment to the actual figures by Statistics New Zealand. No other change to the target would be planned.
Honourable supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
That was not achieving target, moving goalposts. Supplementary.
Supplementary question.
Yep. Is the government's plan to turn the economy around the same business growth agenda that has seen exports actually decrease as a percentage of GDP?
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Todd McLeay.
No, Mr. Speaker, that's an extremely misleading comment. In 2008, when we came to government, there was $59 billion worth of exports. In 2014, there was $67 billion worth of exports. Businesses up and down New Zealand who have been involved in this increase of exports and the people they employ are grateful for the hard work the government has put in to the importance of exporting for New Zealand.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
Is the Minister concerned that figures released yesterday show that in the year to March 2015, his government has overseen the largest annual trade deficit since the recession ended in 2009? And if so, when will he admit his tired government is out of ideas and has failed to deliver on its promises?
Speaker.
Honourable Todd McLeay.
On behalf of the Minister, the member needs to be careful not to read too much into short-term fluctuations in statistics. Indeed, the change in trade volumes that was announced yesterday is a result of, reflects changes in downward pressure of some commodity prices and that the economic cycle for Australia and China are in a different place. But I repeat an answer to the an earlier question, Mr. Speaker. We've seen strong growth in exports since 2008 in both goods and services. Last year, $68 billion was exported. In 2008, there was only $51 billion. That's an increase of $17 billion over that period of time.
Order. Point of order, Materia Ture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just ask if you could return to the House at some point with some ruling around the nature or how we should describe documents when we seek leave to table. You have been consistent in saying that we need to identify the source and the date, which members do. You've also previously asked us to briefly describe the document so members know what they may be agreeing to or not. But you have today twice now ruled that no content can be described. That does not seem to be consistent and makes it impossible for us to decide whether or not to grant leave or not.
Order. I'll give some consideration to the point made, because I think it's a reasonable point. If you look carefully at both, particularly Speaker's rulings, we require immediately the source of the document. And on the occasion yesterday, it took quite some time to find out the source of the document. We require the date, and I'll determine how much description of content we then need. But what I do object to is members taking the opportunity to describe the content in their own version to make a political point. The tabling of a document is not the opportunity for any member to make a political point. It is about providing further information to the House that may not be readily available to members. But I will give further consideration. Question number 11, Jonathan.